Dr. Lara stood in the dusty village square, her silver medkit gleaming in the afternoon sun. She had come from the Central Galactic Medical Academy, one of the most advanced medical schools in the known worlds. Every step she took was precise. Every tool she carried was made of shining metal and humming circuits. She looked like she had stepped out of a laboratory and into another century. Daniel stood across from her, his hands resting on a wooden table covered with jars, bundles of dried leaves, and bowls of crushed roots. He was tall, with weathered skin from years under the sun, and eyes that held both warmth and quiet strength. "This is your clinic?" Lyra asked, her tone halfway between surprise and disbelief. "It works," Daniel said simply. She smiled. Faintly, but it wasn't a kind smile. "I thought I was here to observe human medicine, not kitchen experiments." Daniel didn't answer. He only gestured toward the bench where a young boy sat, coughing. "We can talk after I treat him." Lyra watched as Daniel crushed a handful of leaves, mixed them with warm water, and applied the paste to the boy's chest. He murmured a few words, telling the boy's mother how often to change the wrap. Lyra kept her arms crossed, recording the scene into her wrist scanner. In her mind, this was all outdated nonsense. But Daniel didn't seem offended. He had seen this reaction before people who thought that if something didn't come from a lab, it couldn't possibly work. Over the next few days, they worked in the same space, but it didn't feel like working together. Lyra focused on her devices, scanning and diagnosing patients with precision. Daniel treated people with plants, teas, and salves. They spoke only when necessary, and even then, their words felt like they had to cross a long distance between them. That distance reminded Daniel of someone else, years ago. His younger sister, Mara, had left their village to join the Galactic Research Fleet. She had been full of dreams, convinced that the stars held the answers to every problem. At first, they wrote to each other every week. She would tell him about strange worlds, and he would tell her about the people he was helping back home. But slowly, the letters stopped coming. Months passed without a word. He told himself she was busy. He told himself she was fine. But the truth was, he didn't know anymore. Now, watching Lyra move around the clinic with her cold, careful hands, Daniel felt that same distance. Kind where someone is close enough to see, but too far to really reach. One afternoon, after the last patient left, Lyra closed her medkit and looked at him. "Why do you keep doing this? Don't you want real equipment? Real medicine?" Daniel met her gaze. "This is real. The people here trust it. And it works." She shook her head. "Trust doesn't cure illness." "Sometimes," Daniel said. "It's the first step." They didn't speak again for the rest of the day. That night, Daniel sat outside his small home, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Mara might be staring at the same sky. He wanted to send her a message, to tell her he still missed her, but he didn't know if she'd even get it, or if she'd want to dot in his pocket. He carried an old wooden pendant she had given him before she left. It was carved in the shape of a leaf from their home forest. He ran his fingers over it, wondering if she still remembered making it. The next morning, Daniel returned to the clinic early. Lyra was already there, scanning her supplies. "You're here before sunrise," he said. She didn't look up. "I couldn't sleep." He nodded. "I know the feeling." They worked quietly through the day. Sometimes their hands brushed as they passed each other tools. Sometimes they shared a short look when a patient smiled in relief. Something small and unspoken was changing. That evening, as they closed the clinic, Lyra spoke again. "Back home, I had a friend," she began, her voice softer than before. "We studied together. We told each other everything. But when I left for the academy, we drifted apart." Daniel listened, saying nothing. "I kept thinking I'd write to her," Lyra went on, "but I didn't know what to say after so. long, and now I don't know if I could ever make it the same." Daniel smiled gently. "You can't make it the same, but you can make something new." She looked at him for a moment, then nodded. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over the village. Somewhere deep inside, Daniel felt a small hope, a hope that maybe, if Lyra could find her way back to her friend, he could find his way back to Mara Dot. And though she didn't say it out loud, Lyra felt something too. She had come here to study. A healer, she thought, was stuck in the past. But every day she watched him work. She realized there was a kind of knowledge that didn't need machines or scanners to be real. It was the kind of knowledge that could bridge distances not just between sickness and health, but between hearts that had grown far apart. She had knocked his primitive medicine when they first met. But somewhere deep inside, she was beginning to wonder if it could heal more than their science ever could. Asterisk. The days in the village passed with a steady rhythm. Patients came, patients left, and the quiet space between Daniel and Lyra stayed the same. It was not cold anymore, but it was not close either. They worked side by side, yet Daniel still felt like she was only half here. It reminded him too much of Mara. He could still picture the last time he saw her. She had been standing at the edge of the landing pad, wearing her new galactic fleet uniform, her eyes bright with excitement. She had promised to write, to send pictures of the worlds she would visit. For a while she did, but then the messages became shorter, then fewer, then nothing at all. Sometimes Daniel wondered if she had changed, so much that she wouldn't even recognize their home anymore. Lyra, in her own way, seemed like someone from that other world, clean, sharp, full of rules and schedules. She carried herself like she belonged to something bigger and busier than this quiet place. And yet, sometimes, Daniel caught her looking around the village as if she were trying to see it for the first time. One afternoon, a mother came in carrying a little girl who had a deep cut on her arm. Daniel quickly washed the wound with an herbal mixture while Lyra prepared a sterile seal from her kit. "It will close faster if we use my treatment," she said. Daniel shook his head. "The seal traps in some of the dirt. We'll clean it properly first." She frowned. "That's not how we were taught. We use the seal right away to prevent infection." "And we were taught," Daniel replied calmly, "that if you rush, you might miss what's still inside the wound." For a moment their eyes met. Neither backed down. But when the girl winced, Lyra stepped back and let him finish. After the patient left, Lyra sat on the bench, clearly frustrated. "You don't trust my methods." Daniel wiped his hands on a cloth. "I trust that you care about the patient. But trust in the method, that takes time." She didn't answer. Instead, she started cleaning her equipment. Daniel knew that. Look, it was the same one he used to have when Mara corrected him about something. Back then, he never admitted it, but her words stayed in his mind long after. That night, Daniel lay awake on his small bed, listening to the crickets outside. He thought about sending Mara a message. He even opened the old communication console in the corner of the room. But when the message screen blinked to life, he froze. What would he say? "Hi, it's been years. I miss you." Would she even remember the sound of his voice? He closed the console without sending anything. The next morning, Lyra surprised him. She was sitting at the clinic table, reading one of his old plant journals. "You've kept these for years?" she asked. "Some of them belong to my grandmother," Daniel said. "She wrote about every plant she used, how to find it, how to prepare it, what it could cure." Lyra turned a page slowly. "You've built on her work." Daniel nodded. "Every healer does. We learn from those who came before us." She closed the book and set it gently on the table. "We do that in the academy too. But sometimes I think we forget the people behind the discoveries." There was a pause, and then she said, almost too quietly, I haven't spoken to my friend in years. We used to talk every day. Now, I don't even know where to start." Daniel's heart tightened. "I know that feeling." For the first time, Lyra looked at him not as a subject to study, but as someone who understood. That afternoon, they walked to the edge of the village to gather herbs. The forest was cool and green, with the smell of damp earth and fresh leaves. Lyra moved carefully, watching how Daniel identified each plant. "This one?" she asked, pointing to a tall stem with small purple flowers. Daniel smiled. "That's moonleaf. It helps with fevers." She picked one carefully and placed it in the basket. "Do you ever send these plants to your sister?" Daniel paused. "I used to send her dried leaves when she first left. She said they reminded her of home." But then she stopped replying. Lyra was quiet for a moment. Maybe she doesn't know what to say sometimes. When too much time passes, it's easier to stay silent than to risk saying the wrong thing. Her words felt like they belonged to both of them. As they walked back, Daniel thought about what she said. Maybe Mara was not ignoring him. Maybe she was just as unsure as he was. The thought was small, but it was enough to feel like hope. When they returned, an older man was waiting at the clinic. He had trouble breathing, and his hands trembled. Lyra scanned him with her med device, but it could not find the cause. Daniel listened to the man's chest, then opened a jar of crushed leaves. "This should help clear his lungs," he said, handing it to Lyra. She hesitated, then gave it to the patient herself. The days had been peaceful for a while. Patients came with small cuts, fevers, and cough, nothing Lyra's equipment or Daniel's herbs couldn't handle. They had fallen into a rhythm, one that almost felt comfortable, but comfort has a way of being broken. It began with one man, a farmer, who came into the clinic with a strange golden rash across his neck. He said it itched at first, but then his muscles began to feel weak. Lyra scanned him with her med device. It flashed red and displayed "no match found." "That's not possible," she said, scanning him again. The result was the same. Daniel stepped forward and looked closely at the rash. His brow furrowed. "I've never seen this before." They gave the man a rest bed in the back room, but the next morning 3 more people came in with the same rash and weakness. By the 3rd day, there were 11. Lyra sent all her data to the Central Galactic Medical Board. She requested an urgent response, but the reply she got was brief. Further analysis required. Estimated time for full response: 10 days. 10 days felt like forever. As more patients came, the clinic filled with tension. People whispered in the square. Some wore cloths over their faces. The sickness was spreading faster than anyone expected. One evening, after they had finished seeing patients, Daniel sat by the window, staring into the dark. "You're thinking about your sister," Lyra said quietly. He didn't turn to look at her. "If she were here, she'd know what to do. You don't know that," Lyra said gently. "I know she'd try," he replied. They were both silent for a while. The night air was heavy, carrying the faint sound of wind in the trees. Finally, Lyra spoke again. "I sent my friend a message. She hasn't answered yet. But I keep checking, like maybe the next time I look, she have replied." Daniel gave a small smile. "That's hope. It keeps you looking, even when nothing changes." The next morning, the illness took its first severe turn. One of the patients, a boy no older than 12, collapsed and could barely breathe. Lyra tried every filter, every scan, every injection her kit allowed. Nothing worked. Daniel brought a steaming bowl of crushed herbs for the boy to breathe in. It eased him for a short while, but the fever returned stronger. "We're missing something," Lyra said, her voice tight. "We're treating the symptoms, but not the cause." "Then we find the cause," Daniel said firmly. They began spending every spare moment reviewing their notes. Daniel pulled out old journals from his grandmother, flipping through pages written in faded ink. Lyra rechecked her scanner logs, comparing the results. One entry in the old journal caught Daniel's eye. It spoke of a fever of gold that had spread through the village decades ago. The description matched almost perfectly the rash, the weakness, the breathing trouble. It says the cure came from a plant that only blooms under moonlight, Daniel said, tapping the page. The petals are boiled into a thick tea. Lyra frowned. And you believe this? I believe my grandmother knew what she was talking about, Daniel replied. She hesitated, then said, even if it's real, do you know where to find it? Daniel shook his head slowly. Not yet, but I know where to start looking. They agreed to search that night. The patients were stable for now, but Daniel could see in Lyra's face that she was just as worried as he was. As the sun set, they left the clinic and walked into the forest. The light faded to silver, and the air grew cooler. Daniel moved with careful steps, scanning the ground for signs of the plant. This feels strange, Lyra admitted. I'm used to working in clean rooms, under bright lights, with everything controlled. Daniel smiled faintly. Sometimes the cure isn't where you expect it to be. They walked for hours. Twice, Daniel thought he saw the right leaves, only to realize they belonged to another plant. Lyra's scanner couldn't identify anything. They were searching blind. Then, as the moon rose higher, a faint shimmer caught Daniel's eye. Under a cluster of low branches, small white petals glowed faintly in the moonlight. Moonleaf, Daniel whispered. Lyra knelt beside it, touching the petals gently. It's beautiful. They collected the blooms carefully, wrapping them in cloth. Daniel carried them back to the clinic, as if holding something fragile and precious inside. He began the process his grandmother had written about, boiling the petals slowly, letting the steam rise until the water turned a pale gold. Lyra watched. Every step, her eyes following his hands. She didn't interrupt. When the tea was ready, Daniel poured a small cup and brought it to the sick boy. The boy sipped weakly, his hands trembling. They waited. Hours passed. Then, just before dawn, the boy's breathing steadied. The fever lessened. The golden rash began to fade. Lyra stared at the scanner results in disbelief. The toxin markers. They're disappearing. Daniel looked at her. Sometimes the cure is real even before science can explain it. She didn't argue. That morning, as the sun lit the village, Daniel checked his console. A message waited for him. Mara, I'm sorry I didn't write. I didn't know what to say. But I've missed you. Tell me about your work. Tell me about you. Daniel smiled. Somewhere across the stars, the distance between him and his sister had just grown smaller. And though Lyra's console still showed no reply from her friend, she found herself smiling too. She had seen a boy heal in front of her eyes. She had seen a method she once mocked succeed when her science could not. For the first time since arriving, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The boy's recovery brought relief to Daniel and Lyra, but it was only one case. The sickness had not stopped spreading. Each day, new patients came in: farmers, merchants, children. The clinic was always full, and the air was heavy with worry. Daniel tried to keep up with the herbal tea made from the moonleaf plant, but there was a problem. It grew far from the village, and the bloom only lasted a few nights each cycle. They didn't have enough for everyone. Lyra worked tirelessly, using every tool in her medkit. She set up an air filter in the clinic, ran blood tests, and injected patients with nutrient formulas. But nothing slowed the illness except Daniel's. This doesn't make sense, she muttered late one night, staring at her scanner results. My equipment is designed to handle thousands of diseases, but it's useless here. Daniel, grinding more petals with a stone bowl, looked up. Machines can only do what they're told. Sometimes the sickness is older than the machine's memory. Lyra sighed and rubbed her forehead. The medical board sent another message today. They're still working on the analysis. By the time they figure it out, half the village might be gone. Daniel didn't answer. He was thinking of Mara. Her message was still fresh in his mind. She had asked him to tell her about his work. He had replied, describing the illness and the tea. She had written back once more short. But warm. That sounds like you. Always finding your own way. I'm proud of you. He kept rereading those words when the work felt too heavy. They were a reminder that even far away, she still cared. But distance was still there, between him and Mara, between Lyra and her friend, between the sick and the healthy. It was a gap that felt impossible to close all at once. The next evening, they visited the forest together to collect more moonleaf. The moonlight shone through the leaves, silver and soft. It's strange, Lyra said as she crouched to pick a bloom. When I was at the academy, I thought I'd be ready for anything. But now, I feel like I'm learning medicine all over. Again, Daniel smiled faintly. That's how it feels when you leave home for the first time. You think you know everything you need. Then the world shows you otherwise. She glanced at him. Is that how it was with your sister? He paused. Yes. She thought the stars would have all the answers. I stayed here because I thought home was where the answers were. Maybe we were both right. Maybe we were both wrong. They worked in silence for a while. Daniel noticed that Lyra was more careful with the plants now, treating them as something precious. She no longer spoke of them as primitive. When they returned, the clinic was crowded. Several patients had taken a turn for the worse. One woman struggled to breathe, her face pale and her hands trembling. Lyra rushed to her side, scanning her vitals. The infections reached her lungs, she said urgently. She tried her purifier device again, but the numbers didn't change. Daniel prepared the moonleaf tea, but they had only enough for 2 patients that night. They gave it to the sickest ones, and the rest had to wait. That night, Daniel sat alone on the clinic steps, staring out at the quiet village. The stars were bright, and he wondered if Mara was looking at them too. He pulled out his console and sent her another message. It's hard here. We're running out of medicine. But I'm glad you wrote back. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear from you. He didn't expect her to answer right away, but within minutes, the console beeped. Mara, I wish I could be there. I know you'll find a way. You always do. Those words stayed with him as he went back inside. In the days that followed, he and Lyra made a decision. They would try to grow moonleaf closer to the village. It had never been done before. The plant had always grown wild in the forest. But Daniel believed that if they recreated its environment, it might take root. Lyra helped design a small greenhouse using materials from her ship. She adjusted the temperature and light cycles while Daniel prepared the soil with ground herbs. It was slow work, but it gave them something to hope for. One afternoon, while tending the greenhouse, Lyra checked her console. She froze, then smiled softly. My friend wrote back, she said quietly. The greenhouse became the heart of the village. People stopped by every day, peeking in to see if the moonleaf was blooming yet. Daniel and Lyra took turns caring for the plants, watering them, checking the temperature, and making sure the light stayed just right. Even with the hope of the greenhouse, the sickness still weighed on them. Patients kept coming, and the few wild moonleaf blooms they could find in the forest were not enough. Each time Daniel had to choose which patient would get the tea, he felt the choice carve a little deeper inside him. One evening, after a long day, Daniel sat outside the clinic, holding his console. Mara's messages had been more regular now, short notes every few days, always ending with encouragement. Keep going. I believe in you. I told my crew about you today. They said your work sounds amazing. Daniel wanted to tell her everything, how hard it was, how afraid he felt for his patients, how much he wished she could be here. But each time he began typing, the words felt too heavy. He didn't want to burden her, so he sent small updates instead. Inside, Lyra was sitting at the clinic table, reading her friend's latest message. She says she's trying to get a transport here, Lyra said quietly. It might take months, but she wants to help. Daniel smiled. Sounds like she's not so far away anymore. Lyra nodded, but her eyes still carried worry. I just hope she doesn't get here too late. The next week, a wave of patients arrived from a nearby settlement. The illness had reached them too. Many were already weak when they arrived. The clinic was overrun, and Daniel and Lyra worked without rest, moving from bed to bed. That night, they checked the greenhouse again. The moonleaf buds were larger, their petals pale and almost ready. 2 more nights, Daniel said. Maybe 3. 3 might be too long, Lyra murmured. The following day, an older man collapsed in the middle of the square. He was one of the first patients Daniel had treated weeks ago, and he had seen better. But now the rash had returned, and his breathing was shallow. Lyra tried everything from her med kit oxygen support, blood cleansing injections, lung stimulants. None of it worked. Daniel stood over the man's bed, his hands tightening into fists. We need the tea, now. But the blooms, Lyra began, might open tonight. Daniel finished. They waited until sunset and went to the greenhouse. The air inside was warm and humid, carrying the faint scent of the plants. In the silver light of the moon, the first blooms opened, white petals glowing faintly. Daniel and Lyra harvested them quickly but carefully. Back in the clinic, Daniel boiled the petals in a pot over the small stove. Lyra watched the water turn gold, her face tense with hope and fear. When it was ready, Daniel held the cup to the older man's lips. The man swallowed weakly, then lay back, breathing raggedly. They waited. Minutes passed. Then the man's breathing eased. His color returned slowly, the tension in his face softening. Lyra checked her scanner and stared at the results. It's the same as before. The toxin markers are dropping. He's stabilizing. Daniel exhaled a long breath. We can save the rest. That night, they brewed tea for as many patients as they had blooms. The greenhouse would produce more. Over the next few days, enough for the whole village if they worked quickly. Between boiling water, caring for patients, and checking the greenhouse, Daniel found a quiet moment to write to Mara. We found a way. I think we're going to make it. I wish you could see this. She replied almost instantly. I don't need to see it. I can hear it in your words. I'm proud of you, little brother. Daniel sat there for a long moment, reading those words again and again. The distance between them was still real, but it no longer felt like an empty space. It felt like a road he could travel, one message at a time. In the corner, Lyra sat by her console, smiling faintly at something on the screen. Your friend? Daniel asked. She says she's bringing supplies from her planet, Lyra said. But she also says she just wants to see me again. I didn't realize how much I missed hearing that. Daniel nodded. Sometimes we don't know until we hear. The sickness had not ended yet, but for the first time, they felt like they were ahead of it. The village buzzed with quiet hope, and the greenhouse glowed softly in the moonlight. Daniel looked at Lyra and thought of how far they had both come, not just in finding a cure, but in crossing the distances inside themselves. She had mocked his primitive medicine when they first met, but now she carried a small pouch of dried moonleaf everywhere she went, as if she understood that some cures could heal more than the body. And Daniel knew that if his sister ever came home, he would have more to tell her than he ever imagined. The next days passed in a blur of work. Every morning, Daniel went straight to the greenhouse to check the moonleaf. Each night, he brewed tea for the patients. The sickness was still there, but now it was losing. For the first time since it began, Daniel felt like they were winning. The village changed too. People who had once walked slowly, coughing and pale, now sat outside their homes, talking quietly. Children began to play again in the dusty streets. The air itself felt lighter. Still, Daniel thought often of Mara. He had told her about their progress, and her replies came quickly now, sometimes, only hours apart. Yet the messages could never show her the smell of the moonleaf tea, the relief in a patient's eyes, or the warmth of the fire in the clinic at night. He wanted her here, not just to see, but to feel it. One evening, Daniel came back from the greenhouse to find Lyra smiling at her console. "What is it?" he asked. "She's here," Lyra said. Turning the screen so he could see was a live message from Lyra's friend, speaking over a shaky connection. Her face was lit by the pale light of a transport ship. "I'll be landing in 2 days," she said. "I'm bringing supplies and more medkits. We'll finish this together." Daniel felt a small ache in his chest. "That's good news." Lyra looked at him. "Maybe your sister could come too." Daniel shook his head. "It's not that simple. She's on a long mission. But—" He paused. "She said she was trying to send something." The next morning, the sky above the village was filled with the low hum of engines. A small cargo pod descended, its metal shell gleaming in the sunlight. The villagers gathered as it landed near the square. Daniel and Lyra were the first to open it. Inside were crates of dried food, medical tools, and at the very top a small, sealed box with Daniel's name on it. His hands shook as he opened. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, was a small music player. There was also a note, written in Mara's handwriting. "I know you're far from home, but I thought maybe this could carry a little of it to you. Play it when you're tired. I'm with you in every note." Daniel swallowed hard. That night, after the last patient had been treated and the greenhouse checked, he sat outside the clinic, under the stars. He pressed the play button. Soft music filled the air, gentle guitar strings, and a slow rhythm. It was the kind of music their father used to play when they were children. It wrapped around Daniel like a warm blanket, and for the first time since Mara had left, he felt as if she were sitting beside him. The music became part of their routine. In the mornings, Daniel played it while preparing tea. Patients would hear the tunes drifting from the clinic and smile. Even Lyra began humming the melodies while she worked. 2 days later, Lyra's friend arrived. She brought not just supplies, but also stories, how the sickness had spread to other settlements, and how news of the moonleaf cure was already spreading across the region. "We'll need to teach others how to grow it," she said. Daniel nodded. "We will." The three of them worked side by side, turning the greenhouse into a teaching space. Villagers came to learn how to plant, water, and harvest moonleaf. Within a week, small patches of the plant were growing in courtyards and windowsills, all over the settlement. Each night, Daniel sent Mara short messages about the progress, and each time her replies carried a little more warmth. "It's not just the plants you're growing, little brother. It's hope." One evening, after the last patient had gone home, Lyra sat down beside Daniel. "When this is over," she said, "what will you do?" Daniel thought for a moment. "I'll go see her," he said simply. "No matter how far, I'll go." Lyra smiled. "That's a good answer." The sickness faded faster than anyone expected. By the end of the month, no new cases appeared in the village. The clinic was quiet for the first time in weeks. On the night they declared the village free of the illness, the people gathered in the square. They lit lanterns and sang songs, their voices carrying through the warm night air. Daniel stood near the edge of the crowd, looking at the stars. Somewhere out there, Mara was watching the same sky. He took out the music player and pressed play. The guitar notes rose softly, blending with the laughter of the villagers. Lyra's friend joined them, and the three stood together. Watching the lantern's drift upward dot in that moment, Daniel understood something. Distance didn't always have to be a wall. Sometimes it could be a bridge, something you crossed in small steps, until one day you were standing together again. Lyra glanced at him. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" He smiled. "I always am, but now it doesn't hurt as much." The music played on, and above them the lanterns rose, higher, glowing like small moons in the night.